When we think of the Wild West, images of heroic lawmen and villainous outlaws often come to mind. But what about the complex realities that fueled those legendary conflicts? Welcome to Blind History with Josh Barry, the podcast that digs deeper into history's most captivating clashes. I'm your host, and we have our resident Wild West expert here to continue with part 2 of the Cochise County Cowboys. Today we're unraveling the tangled web of the Cochise County Cowboys and the Earp brothers in Tombstone, Arizona. Were they simply good versus evil, or was something more at play?
I'm thrilled to be here on the show today. This is a story that's been romanticized and simplified for generations. Our goal is to restore some of the complexity and understand the collision of cultures and economies that fueled the conflict.
Exactly. It's time to unpack the real story behind the legends of Tombstone.
The unifying topic here is the multifaceted nature of the conflict between the Earp brothers and the Cochise County Cowboys, moving beyond simplistic good versus evil narratives.
Let's start at the beginning. What set the stage for this showdown? What were the Earps trying to achieve, and what was the deal with the Cowboys?
Well, the Earp brothers, particularly Wyatt, saw themselves as agents of progress and order. They represented a new kind of law enforcement, one tied to Northern Republican interests and Eastern mining capital. They aimed to establish stability and enforce the rule of law in a booming but chaotic territory.
And the Cowboys?
The Cochise County Cowboys, on the other hand, were a loosely organized faction deeply rooted in the old Jacksonian frontier. They were about violent independence, opportunism, and a rejection of centralized authority. Think cattle rustling, smuggling, and resisting any outside interference in their way of life.
So, a clash of ideologies and economies, really.
Precisely. This wasn't just about good guys versus bad guys. It was about two completely different ways of life colliding. One key element that kept recurring was political power.
Political power? How so?
The Cowboys held significant sway in Cochise County, particularly among the rural, Democratic electorate. They had a symbiotic relationship with Sheriff Johnny Behan, who often turned a blind eye to their activities. This protection allowed them to operate with near impunity.
So, local politics were deeply intertwined.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a critical point: the stolen U.S. Army mules. This incident really highlighted the Cowboys' brazenness and the Earps' frustration. Virgil Earp, as Deputy U.S. Marshal, tracked the mules to the McClary Ranch, only to find that the U.S. brands had been clumsily altered to read D8.
That's incredibly audacious.
It was. A tense standoff ensued, and a compromise was reached. The Cowboys promised to return the mules, but they never did. To the Earp brothers, this was a public humiliation and a clear sign that diplomacy was useless. It cemented their belief that the Cowboys were actively trying to undermine their authority.
It sounds like the conflict was escalating rapidly.
Indeed, the attempt to steal the mules was a turning point, revealing the Cowboys' disdain for law and order, and the Earps' determination to uphold it.
And the Earps' frustration eventually led to a disastrous pact with Ike Clanton, right?
Yes, Wyatt, driven by his ambition to become sheriff, made a deal with Ike Clanton, a prominent cowboy. The idea was that Ike would lure 3 wanted cowboys, Leonard, Head, and Crane, to a specific location, and Wyatt would arrest or kill them. In return, Ike would get a cut of the reward money and potentially be positioned to take over the cowboy syndicate.
A Faustian bargain, as they say.
Exactly. But the deal fell apart, and it only deepened the animosity between the Earps and the Cowboys. It showed that both sides were willing to operate outside the law to achieve their goals.
So, we're not dealing with simple heroes and villains here.
Not at all. Everyone involved was flawed and driven by their own agendas.
Let's bring back the unifying topic, which is to remember that the conflict was multi-layered and complex. Then, of course, comes the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral. How did that all unfold, and what were its immediate consequences?
The shootout itself was brief but brutal. It was the culmination of months of escalating tensions and failed attempts at negotiation. When the smoke cleared, 3 cowboys were dead, and the Earps and Doc Holliday were facing murder charges.
And the legal proceedings that followed were equally messy.
Absolutely. The Cowboys, aided by Sheriff Behan, tried to frame Doc Holliday for an earlier stagecoach robbery, even manipulating Big Nose Kate Elder into signing a false affidavit. In return, the Earps accused Behan of protecting the Cowboys. The legal system became another battleground in this ongoing war.
It sounds like the situation was spiraling out of control.
Definitely. The violence didn't end at the OK Corral. The Cowboys retaliated with a series of attacks against the Earps, including the attempted assassination of Virgil Earp and the murder of Morgan Earp.
The assassination of Morgan Earp really marked a turning point, didn't it?
It was the breaking point for Wyatt. As the document summary notes, the cold, calculating gambler and political aspirant vanished, replaced by a man consumed by a singular, terrifying purpose. He realized that the law was useless against a syndicate willing to murder men in the dark.
That's a powerful image. It is. And it leads to the Earp vendetta ride, right?
Exactly. Wyatt, now a deputy U.S. Marshal, formed the federal posse and went on a relentless campaign of retribution against the Cowboys. He and his men tracked down and killed several key members of the syndicate, sending a clear message that their actions would not go unpunished.
So Wyatt essentially became the very thing he was fighting against.
In a way, yes. He abandoned the constraints of the law and embraced a more violent, extrajudicial approach. It raises questions about the nature of justice and the lengths to which people will go to avenge their loved ones.
And the Cowboys' reign of terror eventually came to an end, right?
The Earp vendetta ride certainly dismantled the syndicate's leadership. But as the document summary also highlights, it was the quiet, unstoppable machinery of progress that truly eradicated them. The expansion of the railroad, the influx of corporate cattle conglomerates, and the mass production of barbed wire transformed the open range, physically and economically, fencing the outlaws out of existence.
So it was a combination of factors that led to their downfall.
Yes, the Cowboys simply couldn't adapt to the changing times. Their way of life was incompatible with the forces of modernization.
That brings us to a common assumption that the Earps were unequivocally the good guys who brought law and order to the Wild West. Is that really accurate?
Well, as we've discussed, the reality is far more nuanced. The Earps were certainly committed to establishing a stable society, but they were also driven by personal ambition and a willingness to bend the rules. Their methods were often as violent and ruthless as those of the Cowboys.
So it's not as simple as black and white.
Exactly. Both sides were operating in a morally gray area. It's a story of competing interests and conflicting values, not just heroes and villains.
And how has this conflict been portrayed in popular culture over the years?
The myth-making began almost immediately after the gunfight at the OK Corral. Dime novels and frontier journalism sensationalized the events, often portraying the Earps as righteous lawmen and the Cowboys as inherently evil outlaws. As the document summary states, the narrative surrounding the Tombstone conflict was largely dictated by the victors.
That makes sense. History is often written by the victors.
Indeed, and Wyatt Earp himself played a significant role in shaping his own legend. He spent his later years carefully curating his legacy with the help of friendly journalists and writers.
So the popular image of Wyatt Earp is, to some extent, a carefully constructed persona.
Yes, and Hollywood has further cemented this image through countless Western films. In classic films, the Cowboys were heavily fictionalized to suit the moral absolutes of the mid-century Western. They were often portrayed as one-dimensional villains who needed to be shot by good men.
It's a shame that the complexities of the real story have been lost in translation.
It is. But in recent years, there's been a growing effort to reintroduce those complexities and challenge the traditional narratives. The 1993 film Tombstone, for example, brought the Cowboys back to the forefront of the public imagination and showed them as a more organized and politically connected force.
That's a positive step.
Yes, and it also demonstrates the enduring appeal of this story and the power of myth-making. The key is to find a balance between entertainment and historical accuracy.
Let's reiterate the topic one more time. It's about remembering that the Cochise County Cowboys and the Earp brothers were not acting alone. Politics, social status, and business all played a role in the events. So, what's the lasting takeaway from this deep dive into the Tombstone conflict?
The most important insight is that the conflict was a product of its time and place. It was a clash between two irreconcilable ways of life, fueled by economic interests, political rivalries, and personal vendettas. By understanding these complexities, we can move beyond the simplistic narratives and gain a more nuanced understanding of the American West.
Why does this story still matter today?
The Tombstone conflict serves as a reminder that history is rarely as simple as we think. It challenges us to question our assumptions and to look beyond the surface to understand the deeper forces at play. It also highlights the dangers of romanticizing the past and the importance of seeking out multiple perspectives.
So, what questions should our listeners be pondering as they reflect on this episode?
Perhaps this: how do we ensure that the stories we tell about the past reflect the complexities of human experience rather than simply reinforcing our own biases and preconceptions? Stay tuned for the full article edition, and following that, we'll be taking a look at Wyatt Earp and his brothers.